Welcome to a sunny new podcast where I'll be speaking to people from the arts, business and beyond, and shining a light on their stories of success on the South Coast. I've always loved rebels. Today's guest is Krista Cartlidge, the CEO of the charity MYTIME. And Krista is the best kind of rebel, because she's a rebel with a cause. Together with her amazing team, MYTIME are taking on the system and providing much needed support for young carers in the UK. We talk about the charity's groundbreaking research, how Krista avoids burnout, and her philosophical take on what true success is. Krista is engaging, inspiring, and caring. She's exactly the type of person you want in the trenches beside you. So if you're sitting comfortably, let's do this. Okay, well, welcome Krista. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. The first time our paths crossed was actually at a local event, and where you were talking about your work with MYTIME, a charity supporting young carers. You only spoke for, I think it was like 10 minutes or something, but I was immediately captured by how engaging you were and how passionately you were talking on the subject. And I was sat there at that moment thinking, oh, this lady would make a fantastic guest. So we actually never got the chance to actually even meet that evening. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity now to catch up with you. As I mentioned, we're probably focus a lot on the amazing work MYTIME are doing today, but I always think it's interesting to find out a little bit about the person. You know, everyone loves a story, so I wondered if you wouldn't mind. You started in your career in teaching, and I wondered whether maybe you could just give us a flavour of what your journey to this point's looked like before we get into the rest.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was a geography teacher for 13 years, and I taught up in Loughborough, and then I moved down to London and taught in inner city London schools. And then I had a phone call from a former boss of mine who said, "You're white and working class and from the seaside. Can you come to Bournemouth?" I was like, I think my mum's going to be cross about some of that, but fine. And I ended up moving down to Bournemouth, and I taught here for 5 years before I got involved with the charity. And I absolutely loved teaching, and it was actually against my dad's advice that I got into that. So when I said that I wanted to be a teacher, he wrote me a 10-page letter of all the reasons why teaching was not the profession it used to be. He was a teacher, and obviously, like every good teenager, ignored him completely and did exactly what I wanted to do. But yeah, I have always enjoyed working with children, always enjoyed working with young people, and they make me laugh. They're super challenging. I love the way they think. I like the fact that lots of them haven't got to that stage in life where there are, barriers or things they feel like they can't do. And I just really, really enjoyed it as a career. It was amazing. And then it was towards the end of my teaching career where really it was changes at government level that were being kind of forced down into schools about the way we taught and what we taught and how we taught it, and it wasn't as much fun anymore. And
the bureaucracy took over. I've heard friends who are teachers say much the same, sadly.
Well, I was teaching a class of year 11 students. They're amazing, really hard-working group, and one of them said to me one day, and she said, "You know, when you're stressed, it makes us stressed." And I thought, there's so much pressure now to get the academic results from these kids that actually, you're absolutely right. I'm transferring that pressure that I'm feeling onto you. And actually, where's the joy of learning in that? Where's the fun of figuring out why a meander meanders, or why, a coaster roads in the way it does? And it made me really sad. It made me sad that I'd got there.
What was it? Because I've always loved your inspired by geography. What do you think it was that kind of set off that passion?
That's a really good question. So I was I could have gone either way. And my first year in teaching, my first 3 years of teaching, I was actually a PE and a geography teacher.
Okay.
So I think it's a love of the outdoors.
Yeah.
Always. A bit of wanting to know why things happen and how they happen. But actually, I'm far more of a human geographer. So I'm really interested in people and why we do what we do and how we do what we do. But I always say geography is everything. So there is geography in everything, in terms of you look at the economy and in politics and the way that interacts with the natural environment. So I think it was just a bit of everything. But yeah, I love being outdoors. That is my favourite place to be.
We'll definitely come back to that. That probably, actually, I guess whilst we're on that subject, because you had a journey around a few different places and you've clearly settled down here on the south coast and it's home. And from your perspective, what do you like most about living down here now?
So I came to Bournemouth years and years ago with a friend, and her auntie owned a place up in Camford Cliffs. And I'd never been before, and I was absolutely blown away. I was blown away by the beach, the fact that you could look across the water and see Old Harry Rocks. Yeah. And when we were down here, we kayaked around Brownsea Island, which she still will never forgive me for. But we just had this amazing trip. And then I actually moved here because I met a boy. He sent me a picture and said, "This is the place where my new job is." And I was like, that's the place. That's Branksome. That's where I was. And I think for me, having lived in London, taught in London, when I first came, the idea that I could get my paddleboard out at 5 o'clock in the morning, go for a paddleboard before school, watch the sun come up, I fell in love. And I'm not with the boy anymore that I chased down here, but I went through the whole, should I leave, should I stay? Yeah, exactly. But I like the fact that it is close enough to London that if I need to go and walk over Waterloo Bridge and feel the energy of the city, I can. I completely get that. Like we were talking, having been there myself for 15 years, I do need a taste of that buzz occasionally. Yeah, that's it. And London always feels to me like there's so much opportunity and there's so much culture. And I'm from Brighton originally. Okay. So I'd grown up in a city where, music, art was all around you, and it was a place where lots of people moved to because they wanted that life, so they wanted to feel freer. I think it was probably really seminal in how I've grown up and how I think. But Bournemouth for me, it's the balance. It's so beautiful here. And also I've just met some really good people on the way. Well, that is a great answer. And as people probably have guessed from the title of the podcast, one of the themes I like to explore is success. And I always think one really interesting aspect of that, and there are many as we were talking about earlier, is how it evolves over time as well. So I always like to start by thinking, if you look back, say when you started your teaching career, what would success do you think have been at that point? That's such a good question. I think in the early days, in the first school I ever taught in, it was an amazing school actually, and I learnt a lot there, and I learnt a lot from my mentor. But success would genuinely have been making sure that the kids learnt something, making sure that we had a good time on the way. I still remember one of my PE groups was the group of year 11 girls that wouldn't do PE, and so I used to take them for a walk, and there was kind of an unwritten rule that they were allowed to go behind the bushes and have a flag on the walk round, which absolutely would not happen nowadays at all. So probably my level of what I thought was success, and actually I remember it's the first time I earned a wage, and for me, I was a geography teacher, but I travelled every school holiday. So every time the bell went on the last day of term, I was off and I was out. Straight on the plane. Straight to wherever I could go. And I suppose the money that I earned from teaching gave me the freedom to do that. But then the travel fed into how I was in the classroom and how I taught geography, and trying to really just encourage young people to get out and leave wherever the place was that they were from. So yeah, success to me back then, that would have been about it. That's brilliant. I did geography as an A-level and really liked it, but I have to say I wish I'd had someone like you as a teacher. It would have been, no offence if that teacher's watching, but it would have been a different experience. You've clearly really loved teaching.
And I read one of your quotes, it's where you said it's where you developed your unshakable belief that no child's destiny should be defined by their start in life. And I've seen that's almost become a principle of MYTIME. So it seems like a great sort of point to say, jump off into what inspired you to move from teaching and move to MYTIME.
It's such a good question. So I think I was becoming, as I say, more and more kind of disillusioned with the bigger picture of education. Not being in the classroom with the kids, that was fine. Yeah. But just what was coming down to us through the schools and the kind of pressure that the schools were put under to produce results without the context of what the kids were experiencing and why in some ways that wasn't possible, or they were dealing with X, Y, Z and all these other things that made it harder. And then I actually got asked to give some advice to MYTIME, because MYTIME used to be tiny. So there were, I think, 3 members of staff. I think they worked they were part-time, all of them. And they wanted to do some stuff in schools. And at the time I got asked to kind of give my take on that, which I did. But I also had never heard of Young Carers. I didn't know what I was giving my take on. And so once I started to explore, hang on, who are Young Carers? What I must have been teaching these kids. I was still in the classroom at this point and recognised 2 or 3 of my students as having caring responsibilities, and I'd never joined the dots. And once I started to read more and more about it, I was like, how have I done 13 years in the education system and never had any training on who Young Carers are? But also I got, and we talk about it a lot in MYTIME, crippling teacher guilt over the fact that I had inadvertently made lots of kids' lives much harder when they were already dealing with all of this stuff going on at home. And so when the opportunity came up to step in and lead the charity, I felt like it was a really good opportunity to do some quite exciting and impactful work with a group of young people that had very little recognition, but I knew it could make a difference. And so the first year that I was at MYTIME, I actually taught 2 days a week and ran the charity 3 days a week, because I had a group of tricky year 11 boys, and if you're watching or listening, you know who you are. But they were really hard work, and my head teacher had said to me, like, you can't leave until they're out, and I was like, yeah, fair. So I did that and then moved, as I say, into the charity full time. But I miss teaching. And I'm really lucky in that there's lots of elements of this job where I do still get to talk and public speak.
It's like the best of both worlds, and we'll come to it, because a lot of the work actually kind of flows back into the whole world of schooling and education as well. So it's been perfect from that point of view. You touched on it already, and I said to you before, I felt less guilty not knowing what a young carer was, or having spent much time thinking about it, when you told your story about even now the awareness isn't what it is. So for those people, of which sadly there's probably a few watching or listening, could you just explain what a young carer is?
It's such a good question. So who are young carers? So young carers are children, and children is not a word that they would necessarily identify with, but we'll touch on that, who are caring for somebody in their family. So it might be they're caring for a parent, sometimes both parents. We have lots of kids that are in that position. It could be that they're caring for a sibling, an auntie and uncle, or grandparents often. And the caring roles that they're doing can be for a numerous amount of reasons. So it might be that they're caring for somebody who's got a physical disability, who's got a learning need, who misuses drugs and alcohol, somebody that's got a mental health issue, and often multiple caring responsibilities at the same time. And one of the kids actually said to me once, and it's always stayed with me, you'd be hard pushed to find someone, Krista, that has a physical disability that doesn't also struggle with their mental health.
Oh, that's really wise words from a young kid.
17-year-old boy.
Probably says it all, to your point, doesn't it? And I did want to also emphasise that when you say kids, I mean, some of these kids are super young, aren't they? Like I don't know what the stats are, but you're talking sometimes kids maybe 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah. So there is no, and it feeds into a bigger conversation, but there's no kind of nationally recognised age at which you can start being a carer. And so in certain parts of the country they take them from age 8, age 5, age 7. It's not prescribed. But yeah, we as MYTIME, we work with a huge number of 5-6-year-olds, but we have got some 4-year-olds. And what often happens, particularly for the younger ones, is the type of caring that they're doing is emotional caring. So I had a conversation with a young carer a while ago, and she said to me, my job at home is to never be sad. And I said, what do you mean you can never be sad? And she said, well, if I'm sad, I go to my bedroom and I do that on my own. I said, well, why? And she said, because my job is to keep mummy happy. And this girl was 5.
God, that is heartbreaking, isn't it? Wow.
And obviously at the time you keep a straight face and you kind of talk a bit more and explore it a bit further, but you could see that what she was doing was providing that emotional support to mum, who had a huge amount of different things going on, bless her. But that was how the child kind of felt that her role, or the way her role looked. And actually what we see is then as young carers get older, that's when they often start to pick up more responsibility in terms of doing. So that might be, giving people medicine, helping them bath, helping them shower, helping them get out of bed in the morning. There's lots of different elements of caring. And actually the issue that we tend to face within the young carer sector is that the longer that children are caring, there's a phrase that Professor Solbecker uses, and he's the world's leading expert on young carers. There's nothing that man doesn't know. He's amazing. But he will say that they become institutionalised in their caring role because they've been doing it for so long that they can't picture what that would be like if they weren't.
Yeah, that really makes sense, doesn't it, when you put it like that? And I think, again, as I said, I've spoken to people since I first, heard you talk, and I was, discovered the same thing, a lack of awareness from people I talked about. I think my sister, who's a health visitor, she was aware, but, friends and other people weren't. And this is a significant issue. I think I read the stats. There's estimates, because again we'll come on to that. Like, good people aren't great at identifying it, but I think there's stats that it's could be 1 million kids in the UK alone that fall into that category. I thought it was interesting as well that just looking at the background, I saw something around the Children's Act, which was only in 2014, so not very long ago, talking about that local authorities do have a duty to identify and assess young carers, but there's no further guidance on it beyond that in terms of how it should be done. And is it also true to say that there's no government funding around this area, and Ofsted don't recognise young carers either?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So the 2014 Children's Act and the 2014 Care Act do, as you say, legislate that local authorities have a responsibility to assess young carers. That's not always done. So yes, there is legislation in place, but actually what wasn't happening was then when children's services were being inspected by Ofsted, they weren't being asked to report on young carers anyway. So there's been a big disconnect between the legislation and then how that legislation is then enforced. But you're absolutely right, it's the underfunding. There is no funding. So it's not the fault necessarily of local authorities. They're essentially trying to follow a piece of legislation and make sure that those assessments take place, but they're not funded to then do it particularly well. It's part of another budget, and then they're not held to account on it anyway. So what we see up and down the country is that local authorities are doing the best that they can with the resource that they've got, but what that means is that each local authority has a different threshold for what makes you a young carer. So here, if you live in Dorset, in comparison to living in BCP, which, as you know, could be one road apart, if your postcode is a Dorset postcode or a BCP, there can be a completely different set of thresholds for what makes you a young carer and what doesn't. And then the other piece is that also families don't often know how to articulate the caring. How do you articulate emotional caring? So one of the young men that we work with, he put it so beautifully one day, and he said, when I'm at school and I lose concentration in a class, it's often because it's raining. And I was, what do you mean because it's raining? I thought we were going to get a strange answer. And he said, my mum's arthritis really plays up when it's raining. So I know that if it's raining in the morning, she might be stuck in her chair for the entire day while I'm at school. Wow. And then I'm completely distracted. So how do you measure that? How do you what learning is he losing? What break time enjoyment is he losing? Because in the back of his mind, he's got all of this going on. Yeah. So the assessments that exist, they're good in that they have an assessment that looks at the volume of physical caring, like the hours spent doing jobs. But there is also an assessment for the emotional impact of that. But you've got to be really skilled to be able to ask those questions and really get under the lid of it.
Yeah.
So it's complicated.
You kind of touched upon it there. I mean, you don't think about like these kids almost drifting off to think about, it's bad enough at school, isn't it? You got so much on your plate just as an ordinary kid, so it's difficult to even imagine like how any of these kids can focus at all. But that does inevitably lead to impacts on opportunities, education, physical, mental well-being, and so on. So let's start diving specifically into the work you guys are doing that are, trying to fill all these gaps that you've already identified. Charity based in Bournemouth, brilliant, great story of success on the south coast, but with UK impact. So I guess it's probably a good point to start. Like, what's the mission?
Oh, it's a great one. So our mission is essentially to level the playing field for young carers by providing them with the friendship, the opportunities and the support that they need to go on to live happy, successful adult lives, whatever that looks like to them, because success is different to everybody, happiness is different for everybody. But it comes back to that belief around like no child's destiny should be defined by their beginning. Young carers need support. They need opportunity because, for example, lots of young carers will live in a family where if there's a single parent and that's the parent that's poorly, may not be able to drive them anywhere, may not be able to get them to places. So things that I took for granted growing up, like athletics and swimming, that mum and dad must have ferried me all over the county, the country at points, they're just not an option. And so what MYTIME does is we have 3 programs of support. The first is working in schools, so to train.
Do you mind if we hold on that thought? Because I definitely want to get into all those details. But if you don't mind, I just wanted to carry on setting the scene a little bit.
Okay.
And one thing I just wanted to talk about was when I first heard you speak, one of the things that really caught my attention that I've kind of alluded to already is the fact that you guys are responsible for some first of its kind type of research and reporting. It's called Unseen Sacrifices, and it only came out a couple of months ago, right? I think it was it May?
Yes.
So it's perfect timing. I just thought if we could explain what that was about and why that's so important, then we can get into talking about what you're doing about it with the 3 programs and so on.
Of course. So when I first started at MYTIME, I was really privileged in that the first 2 or 3 months I had loads and loads of space to research and to understand the issue and to really get to grips with it. What was really evident to me in the research that had been carried out was that 1, it was minimal, 2, often conducted by lots of the same people, because there's obviously it's a very small world, the world of young carers, but it focused predominantly on the challenges that young carers were facing. But there was also a huge lack of quantitative data. And as a teacher, as somebody who worked in schools that were obsessed with data, I knew that there was a gap. I understood that there is a picture here that we're not painting, because if we want schools to care that they have young carers, then actually why should they care? And what impact is caring having on education, on opportunity? So the last 3 years we've been working towards publishing the report that you spoke about, and it looks at the data of young carers in comparison to their non-caring peers. Though, not to say they're not caring, but you know what I mean. They don't have a caring responsibility. And it was starker than I ever thought it would be. So young carers at primary school, they're not reaching age-related expectations in maths, in reading and in writing. but like falling like 20%, 25% below their peers.
I was going to say, just to quote, because I've got those in front of me, because like you said, when I read those statistics, and I'm a stats geek as well, it's really significant impact you're talking about. And I just had one down here, like for maths, in terms of young carers hitting age expectations, we're talking about 49% compared to 73% of their peers, which is a huge difference.
And it has a huge knock-on effect. So children who don't reach age-related expectations in maths and English at primary school, only 10% of them will go on to pass GCSE maths and English at GCSE. And actually, the world doesn't function for you if you don't have maths and English GCSE. It's so hard to progress in anything. Even now, like we've got young carers that are on apprenticeships looking at becoming builders or electricians. They don't have English and maths. They can't get onto those courses. They get delayed.
It's so fundamental, isn't it?
Exactly.
Like anyone who's ever gone to any kind of job place, first question, have you got those two things? And if you haven't, your opportunities are immediately narrowed, aren't they? And
that's where the other piece is that when we compared what we saw in terms of young carers data with national data sets, children who speak English as a second language, 60% of them will pass or reach age-related expectations in maths, literacy, whereas young carers aren't. And so that is, for me, a really stark comparison, and we have to now start to understand why. Why is that happening? But also, whilst we're still carrying on looking at the why, we also need to start designing the interventions to prevent that, because for me, knowing that there's a problem, we know there's a problem. We all suspected within the sector that this was a problem, but now we have some data that proves there is an issue. You've got the
evidence.
Yeah. There's two avenues. We can't just sit and explore the why, because actually all these kids are in school at the moment and not getting what they're capable of. So actually we do need to get to the point where we're being quite punchy and starting to design and test the effectiveness of intervention. Because also, if we're ever going to try and attract funding from government for this, we need an answer in terms of if we do X, Y and Z, it makes this difference.
This is how we solve the problem. Exactly. or improve it anyway.
Yeah. I think that's where my background in teaching is quite powerful in this sector, because I'm so used to working in an environment where there's a problem, these children are not going to reach where they need to get to, what can we do to fix it? That actually, we're almost jumping ahead of where we would be if this was a research piece. Because if it was a research piece, it would be why, what, how? But we don't need to do that.
Yeah. So what do you hope the longer term benefits or impacts of this are going to be? Because another stat I read, which I really think's worth flagging up, is that the young carers have got more than double the rate of persistent absence as well. And again, you can only imagine what impact that has on them going forward. But with all of this work, what do you hope will come out of it?
Well, I think there are three concepts that I would link together. So well-being, which then leads to better attendance, which then leads to better attainment, which then links back to well-being. So for me, what I want to see is that young carers have the reasonable adjustments that they need in schools to support them, so that school becomes a safe environment, somewhere to go where they know they'll be heard, they know they'll be seen, they know they'll be understood. But then also without dropping aspiration for them either. So these young people, they're incredible. Like, young carers are incredible. They are so emotionally intuitive. They are so caring. They are so kind, selfless. And it's really hard, actually, because a lot of young carers would say to me they don't identify as that. And they feel enormous amounts of guilt if they feel negative about their caring role. And you don't need to feel guilty. You can love the person that you care for and be super frustrated about the situation that you find yourself in all at the same time. That's okay. But for me, it is around that. It's about, what do young carers need to make schools safe for them so that they are in a place where they can then thrive. And school communities can do that. Like, it's just they need to know they need to do it. in the first place.
Is that the biggest challenge then, do you think, facing you at the moment?
It was initially. So we're now in BCP, we're working with about 80 of the 86 schools locally. So that identification piece is changing, because the more we train teachers, the more we work with them, the more they're able to identify young carers. But it's then thinking creatively around solutions that might work with other students may not work with young carers. So how do you get a young person into school on a day when the person that they're caring for is incredibly poorly and has a hospital appointment? So how do we think outside the box? What solutions can we come up with that actually will mean that those young carers can achieve everything they're capable of, but bearing in mind this enormous piece of their context that's really, really important. So it's a big challenge.
And that probably is a perfect time then to jump into some of the programs and how you're trying to address some of those. So if you don't mind, should we let's talk a little bit about the three of them. So the first one, you mentioned the Employability Programme. I remember that was one that you talked about when I saw you first. 49% of young adult carers aged between 18 and 25 are currently unemployed. Could you tell us a little bit about the programme? And I know you've got some amazing success stories as well.
Yeah, so that was, again, it was a piece of research that I read very, very early when I joined MYTIME. I just thought, this is criminal. So these kids who are, as I say, exceptional young people, what is going on that means that they're not having successful transitions from education into work or into further education or into training? And so we set up the Employability Programme, and it was a colleague of mine called Emma, she was a careers advisor, and she came across from school to come and work with us and design the programme. And essentially it is about supporting young carers through those key transitions. And she designed an 8-week course that the young carers would work through, and it was great because it had the stuff in it you'd expect, like the CV writing and the interview skills and those kind of things. But actually we worked in partnership with Colourworks, another local charity, where we were able to give the young carers colour profiles. So were they reds, were they yellows, were they blues? And that was really helpful for them as well, because they started to see themselves as not just being a young carer, but I've got this and I've got that sort of characteristic. And then there's an ongoing support that follows the programme. So once the young carers have graduated, then we will continue to work with them. So we have an online group because they wanted one, because they wanted to stay in touch with each other, which is great. But what we've realised over time is that young carers, like many other, and I don't really love this phrase, but disadvantaged young people, don't have a network. They don't have the person that can help give them the leg up, to give them the opportunity, to give them this chance. And so what we've been able to do is, through the connections that we've got with local businesses and local business leaders, is find places for these young carers to go. So, and
there's also an education aspect of the businesses themselves, I read.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we did a workshop a while ago with some businesses, local businesses, and one of the young carers said something amazing, and he said what business needs to understand is that when we're carers, when we're young carers, it's like we're new parents. It's obviously very timely for you. In that it's like we're new parents. We might be up half the night. We've got medical appointments that we need to attend. Some days we are just going to be tired. And he said, short of being covered in baby sick, that's basically what our lives look like. And he said, so what we need businesses to understand is that if they can give us the flexibility, we will be loyal, we will perform, we will work hard, but flexibility is absolutely the key. And so it's been really, in a way, one of the real positives of COVID has been the change in the way that we work. We don't have that necessarily traditional 9-to-5 pattern that we did before. You've got to show up 5 days a week. And so for young carers, that in some spots, that's been hugely beneficial for them. But it's as I say, it has been an interesting journey in that there are some jobs where you have to be there. As a teacher, the bell rings at 9, you teach till 10:15, you can't turn up at 9:30, you can't. But there is a lot more flexibility now, and so it's helping businesses to understand that if you can create the space, you will get somebody who is really committed and really good at what they're doing. But
So
they just need a bit of room.
Can you give us a few examples then of success stories? I think you mentioned one. Was it about a paramedic, which I just really kind of struck home?
Yeah, so this young man came to us through the Employability Programme, and again, like I'm not even used to this now when they say things like this, but imagine for the listeners, this is quite new. But said, I want to become a paramedic, and when we asked him why, he said, it's because the paramedics have saved my life, my mum's life, so many times that I just want to do that. I want to give other families what I've seen them give mine. Yeah,
I know we're both going to start crying, aren't we? Yeah.
And he was looking at training to be a paramedic at either Bournemouth University or going away to uni in Hertfordshire, and through the Employability Programme and the work that Emma and the team did with him, he was able to understand that actually he could go away and that there were things that could be put in place for mum while he was gone. And then he went off and did his first year, and it was really challenging for him. He got put in a flat instead of halls of residence, and he didn't make lots of friends because he was coming home every weekend because he was coming back to see mum. And he came dangerously close to dropping out at the end of the first year. But actually, through mentoring with one of our team, who was a former young carer, she managed to, the following year, get him into like a big, uni accommodation where he met lots of people. And those weekly phone calls that she had with him just kept him ticking through and helped him get there. And he has just graduated and he is now a paramedic, which is amazing. And I mean, he is an amazing young man. And I know his mum's incredibly proud of him, as she should be. But just... it's been really key to us, is that what do these young people want to be? What is their opportunity? What do they want? And actually, we have a bit of a phrase internally: you can't be it if you can't see it. And so when you say about opportunity, it's about exposing young carers to all these different opportunities, so they can go, oh, I really like that, or oh God, I really don't like that. And like a friend of mine who was in the Navy, he had a mentor meeting with a young lady who was desperate to join the Navy. And after an hour with him, she came out and said, oh, I definitely don't want to do that anymore. And I said to him, what have you done to her?
Which is just as valuable, though, isn't it? Rather than pursuing the wrong path.
Yeah,
just having access to that type of person,
Yeah, and he was very honest. I mean, he is very honest. He will tell you it like it is. But I was really pleased because you're right. Imagine she'd gone even further down that road and then it hadn't worked out for her in the way she hopes, and she's actually doing something different now that she's loving. So
that's amazing. So I mean, it's just incredible just hearing these kind of stories, and I'm sure you've got loads more. But the second programme, which I guess the way I interpreted it was almost the one most related to the study that you did, so the Level Up programme. Again, what I found really staggering about this was you mentioned lack of consistency in the way young carers are identified across different places. And you mentioned that a stat I read said that in the national school census, 79% of schools did not record a single young carer, which kind of blew my mind. And again, another story of your success on the South Coast is that for the second year in a row, schools in our area, BCP, identified the highest percentage of young carers. So it just goes to show, if you've got the support, what a difference it can make.
Definitely. It's that 79% is, you're right, it's really worrying. There are some technical reasons why that might be the case. So a couple of the big register systems that schools use don't flag young carers automatically, which means the data doesn't get automatically pulled. But what it does is it doesn't give us enough data. So in the first year that they did the school census, which was 2023, what it showed was that there were only 37,000 young carers nationally. Now, we know that's not true. We know that's not the case. In the second year, it was 50,000 young carers nationally. Again, we're talking about, we think there are 1 million out there. So there are some just technical issues that need resolving, and we are doing some work with those companies to kind of share with them what they need to do, because one of them we've done it with and it's worked really successfully. But the second thing is just, it is teaching schools that these kids exist. and they don't fall into the same bracket as other students that would, as I say, a word I don't love, but disadvantage, because they have a very, very distinct need, despite the fact that all their caring responsibilities can be different. And what they need, schools need to understand, and I would have really been challenged to understand this when I was teaching, because you think your subject and your homework and your whatever trip is the most important thing. But the kids will always say, like, the person I care for comes first.
Yeah.
And they have to make those choices every day. So if they get home and say it's mum is super poorly that evening, you got 5 bits of homework that are due in the next day, the young carers, the choice is you've got to look after mum.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they don't feel guilty or worried or anxious about the fact they haven't done the homework, but the human being in front of them that they love and care for is the priority. And then imagine coming into school the next day, you've got 5 bits of homework you haven't done, and then you're greeted with teacher after teacher turning around saying, well, if you want to do well in your GCSEs, this is really important, or have a detention.
Yeah.
Actually, that's hugely over what you're young carers say. Being punished for caring. Yeah. So the big piece of work that we do in schools is around helping schools to understand who young carers are, understand that caring is their priority, the challenges that might mean they present with at school, how you can then support young carers, but also, and this has been our big focus in the last 18 months or so, is track their data. Because once schools start tracking data in the way that they would for other vulnerable groups of students, pupil premium, free school meals, the pattern becomes even more stark. So the report that you're talking about, I've presented it recently to the BCP heads and to the Dorset head teachers, and they were brilliant, but you could see there was a bit of a moment where they went, oh no, is this real? Yeah, sorry guys. And it means more work for the school. And ultimately, they're not being given funding for that at the moment. But the carrot and the stick moment is schools are measured on attendance and attainment. So if you can put wellbeing pieces in place for young carers to attend, their attainment will improve, which ultimately improves the school outcome. But it's hard. It's hard to do in that you're asking busy people that have a lot of responsibility. Could you just do a bit more?
Yeah, no, completely. Well, it is incredibly important work though, because I think like that idea of someone turning up just a few minutes late because they've had an issue to deal with at home and they're being treated the same as everyone who might just have had slept in or whatever, they're both getting detentions for completely different reasons. Yeah. The third one, and obviously all of this stuff is really, we're talking about serious stuff, but I guess this one, making memories, is just a really lovely one, isn't it? In terms of there's just like pure joy that's being spread here.
So the Making Memories programme is, there is a serious element to it, but on the surface, it is all about giving young carers the chance to take a break, meet other young carers, so kids that are in the same situation that they are in, that understand inherently what it means to be a young carer, and have some fun. And actually this all came from a conversation we had with a clinical psychologist very, very early on, who said in his experience young carers are very serious, and we do see that. So they are very grown up. It's something that we tell schools to look for, actually. If you're talking to a 5-year-old and you feel like you're talking to an adult,
because they're running the house,
exactly,
basically.
Ask the question. But he said, like, teaching children to have fun and have a sense of humour is social currency for when they get older. And he said, essentially, you've got to teach them to laugh at fart jokes, Krista. And I was like, right. But I got what he meant in that. And that's where that programme is. It's about giving them the opportunity to try new things that they wouldn't necessarily get to do at home, to hang out with other people that get it, that they don't feel different from, and that they get to just play. And like, there's a place that we take the young carers called Adventure Pirates, and James that runs it is absolutely brilliant. He is brilliant and his team are brilliant. But one of the first things that happen when they get off the bus is they're given about 20 minutes, half an hour just to run around. And it sounds really silly. Lots of them don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They don't know how to do it when it's not structured, when you're being told to have fun at this point. Yeah. And James is so wonderful in that he's got a great big kind of pirate ship, and he'll get them up on there and he'll just like teach them how to play. And it's lovely watching these quite serious children lose themselves and get silly and
That
do
is
silly
incredible.
things. Yeah.
I was going to ask, actually, just in terms of, you can imagine that a lot of these kids, through some of the experience we've talked about, you know, maybe having had trouble at school through no fault of their own, they must be in a way skeptical about some adults and like authority. How do you manage to kind of engage them?
That is such a great question. So we often talk about MYTIME being a recovery centre for teachers, in that I have hired a lot of ex-teachers, but we have some amazing staff who weren't teachers either. And I think we always come at it from the point of view of that we listen to the young carers. And I know, even when I was at school, I used to run the student voice. I wasn't listening, not really listening. They want to catch up in the canteen or whatever. We were talking about things that were quite superficial, but actually we talk to the children. We listen to what they want. We understand them. So the days that we provide, the activities that we do, it's from feedback that they've given us about things they want. So the slightly more serious part of the Making Memories programme is we run first aid training and we run self-defence training with them. And the reason that was, the kids told us, like, we deal with first aid stuff at home all the time, and often the person that we care for doesn't want us to call the ambulance. They don't want us to escalate it or, take it somewhere. We never know if we're doing the right thing. And the anxiety that comes from that is enormous. So by doing a first aid course, and it's bespoke to them, we have a great guy who's a former teacher, former Royal Marine, comes in and he delivers it to them, but he's written a bespoke kind of first aid program for them. And again, it's that taking the anxiety out just a little, that if this situation erupts, they will know how to deal with it. They'll know what to do. And the self-defence came out of the fact that, so many of the young carers talk about being bullied and talk about how unkind other young people are. And I mean, you were a teenage boy once, I was a teenage girl once. You can hear it, can't you, in your head?
Absolutely,
and how they are with each other. And so actually the self-defence day isn't about learning to go and belt another kid if they're mean to you, which I have to be really, the instructor's really good. And he's like, what I'm not teaching you to do is do that. But actually walk with confidence. And one of the parts of the day that he does with them, they have the big punch bags and they get given these kind of, fighting sticks. And I've watched these tiny little cherubs of young people get their sticks and just lose it on the bag. And again, it's an opportunity to let some of that frustration, fear, anger about the situation that they're in out in a safe, controlled way.
I think we could all do with that sometimes.
Honestly, I would recommend John Mortimer on every level. He's very calming, but it's really important, and it's addressing kind of, we try really hard to address the things they tell us that matter. And we have we've worked really hard at making sure that we're not adults that are telling them how they should feel, or telling them what to think or what to do, but actually we're listening to them and then reflecting and learning. So one of the things that we have a residential centre over in the Purbex, and we take small groups there sometimes. And it's really interesting because on a normal school trip, I'd have taken kids away and be like, you tidy your bedroom, you go and make the tea, you get the breakfast out, you do this. And actually we wait on them hand and foot when they're in the centre. And it's hilarious because they don't like it because they're so used to doing it themselves. I'm like, sit down, I will make you a cup of tea. And then you see them relax over the course of the time that they're with us. And so actually it's just being able to take care of them for a little bit. But as I say, with other groups of young people, you'd just be like, you lazy bones, get on with this, do this. Yeah. So there's also just the staff at MYTIME, past and present, just hugely compassionate people who, that's one of our values as a charity, is to really, you don't know what it's like if you haven't been in that situation, but listen, learn, be reflective. What can you do?
And I guess that's a perfect opportunity one of the missions of this podcast is to inform and inspire. And you talk about, the staff and those amazing qualities they have. If what would your advice be to someone sat maybe hopefully watching this and thinking, I'd like to work in the charity sector? What would your kind of advice be?
Such a good one. So I think find the thing that you are passionate about, I know it sounds simple, but it's what's your particular passion, because then some days do feel like work, but most of the time it doesn't, because you can connect to the higher purpose of the work that you're doing and why it makes a difference. Don't underestimate that whatever role you play within the charity, whether it's frontline or whether it's back office, you are making a difference. So I love this quote, but it was the guy they spoke to at NASA, wasn't it, who was the janitor, and he said, they asked him what he did, and he said, I put people on the moon. And that's hugely key. So don't underestimate the role that you play. But also, working in charity is hard, right? In the biggest issue probably is the fact that your job security is not where it might be if you were a nurse, or if you were a teacher, or if you were working for the public sector in a different way, because actually we're entirely dependent on funding. And so I really appreciate the fact that the staff that work at MYTIME are taking a punt, and they're taking a punt on the fact that their livelihood, their financial health is but only as good as we can make the money. And there's been points that when the charity has had tough times and we've had to really make difficult decisions, and it's horrible to have to make. Luckily, it's never gone so far as having to, get rid of multiple amazing members of staff, but it's a constant threat that you live under. And I think, so my biggest advice is to find the thing that you're passionate about, find the thing that is your niche. And also to try and work with great people. Yeah,
that's a good lesson for anyone, isn't it? Whatever you're working in. And it's interesting, you talked about different roles, and I think generally people, we probably only come across people working on, like, I think you call it the front line, but it's interesting to have a CEO of a charity sat before me today. So I have to ask, what does your day-to-day look like in that capacity?
They're all different, which I love. I am, I thrive off change, in truth, and that element of things being different. But it can be so varied. So yesterday, I had an amazing day. I was with a group of older young carers. We went and did aerial yoga and went out for dinner afterwards. And it was awesome. And I had a lovely time. And for me, particularly background in teaching, spending time with the young carers is really important, because 2 days before that, I was sat putting together a huge budget for a huge bid that we're about to put in, playing with numbers, which is not always my favourite thing, I have to say, and going through this mental process of being like, if we won this grant, what could I do with it? And then allowing myself to get so overexcited about that, and then having to think the other side of being like, if I don't win this grant, or we don't win this grant, how do we do this anyway? Where do I go to go and get that funding? And so every day is different. I'm very lucky in this role in that I get to come and talk to people like you about the work that we're doing. I get to talk, we have a big education summit every year, and I get to speak at that. But again, on Wednesday, using my geography, I was looking at multiple indexes of deprivation and the cohort of young carers that we have, and which areas do they live in? So it's hugely varied on a day to day.
How would you define your main responsibilities, though?
Ooh, okay. So in truth, my main responsibility is to keep the lights on, is to keep the money coming in. And the only way that we can do that is by doing really great work with the young carers, and then we have 2 grant writers who are exceptional storytellers, and then taking what we're doing on the ground with the young carers and telling that story so that we can then bring the funding in. And so my job is to kind of keep both sides talking to each other, make sure that the successes that are happening over here, or the things we're learning, because we don't always get it right, obviously, are being passed through to the grant writing team and the fundraisers, so they're still ticking over. And then I suppose as well, maybe one of my other key responsibilities is being the spokesperson of the charity and making sure that people are aware of who we are, what we're doing, and those kind of things.
And hopefully we're helping a little bit on that front today, at least.
Exactly.
I was also, reflecting it, and I can only imagine that working for a charity, I mean, you kind of touched on it, can be really stressful at times, and also frustrating, because you see the problem, there's never enough money, you want to take on the world, and you've got to accept that you can only do it step by step. How do you deal with like that frustration and that kind of danger of burnout, because this is just so all-consuming?
So burnout is a word that I am very familiar with, as you can imagine. I've actually worked really, really hard on this in the last 18 months to find more balance, because you're right. When you're really, really passionate about what you're doing and you're working within a system that's broken, and you're trying to do the work on the ground and change the system at the same time, you're right, it becomes overwhelming because you know that what you're doing makes a massive difference and you want it for every child that's in that position. But actually, you've got to attack the system to create the systemic change and the kind of get rid of the barriers at systems level to make it work. So yeah, burnout is something I've had to work really carefully with. I am very, very lucky in that the senior team and the team at MYTIME are amazing. And so over the last couple of years, we've grown that team, and I have learnt how to delegate and how to, I think, keep my oar out, which I'm not always that good at. So apologies to those of you that are listening that know what I'm on about. But yeah, I think that's been a really big step, but also just making sure that I am managing my energy. And I go to the gym. When I haven't got a bad ankle, I'm out running. I've got a dog that I walk. I'm really conscious of making sure that I'm looking after myself, but also obsessively worry about the team doing the same thing. So it is hard. Like what we do sometimes, emotionally, it can be really hard. And like we had a situation a couple of days ago, which it was really tough. And so it's about creating space for them as well to feel that if they need an afternoon to go and walk the dog or go for a sea swim or go and do whatever it is, do it. And like we have no, something we've really resisted is this concept of, like, I've done X many hours, so I'm going to do, and I have to be there between. We are flexible, and
you treat people like grown-ups that they can make that decision themselves.
Which sometimes they find hard.
Yeah, well, I think everyone's used to that, aren't they? Having to track everything and being, held accountable. Yeah. Where were you for that 5 minutes? So I can imagine that's quite refreshing. So despite all those challenges, I think we should kind of finish this section on a positive, because clearly it's really rewarding work. So what makes it all worthwhile, all of that stress and hard work?
Do you know, there are so many answers to that question.
So that's a whole podcast in
itself.
Yeah.
So like yesterday, one of the grant writers got a major grant that came through, and I'm delighted for her because she worked so hard to put it all together. But also it's amazing for the team. So she won that money for the Making Memories programme. So being able to then tell the Making Memories programme, you're good the next couple of months, like you're fine, this money's come through. And so there's the pleasure in that. There is watching the young carers blossom, and for some of them, the ones that we know well that are involved in a lot of what we do, I'm really lucky in that one of those young carers I used to teach, and she has done absolutely everything that MYTIME has to offer and more with bells on. And watching her growth and how she's changed from where she was to where she is now, that's when you know it. I can't capture that in any words or in a video or in a bottle, but just my observation of her journey is amazing. And then also just watching the team grow and watching them take what we had 4 years ago, which was, an idea, and then like past leaders have developed that, and then now it's in new hands, they're growing it again, and like just the evolution of things and thinking about like where it might be in 5 years' time, it stays so exciting.
Yeah, seeing progress like that is always so rewarding, isn't it? And that leads us on. As you know, another theme of this podcast is happiness, and I know we talked a little bit offline about this, so to speak, and I always think this is a fascinating area. And talking of kids, happy, it's such a small word, isn't it? One of the first words any kid learns. But it seems so complex sometimes in the modern world. So it's just a little question, but what's the true meaning of happiness to you?
I've been thinking about this since you sent it to me, and I think for me, it's feeling free. What I mean by that is that having the freedom to choose to pursue the thing that I'm really passionate about, that is happiness. So I am so lucky that I get to do what I do. I am so lucky that the work that we're doing as an organisation is making a difference. But the fact that we can dictate what it looks like, the fact that we're not waiting for Ofsted to knock on the door or any of those things, is a freedom that means we can respond to what's in front of us, not what we're being told. It's part of the reason why we've never really gone after any council funding, because if you go for government funding, you're then hamstrung and you've restricted in what you do.
You've got other people telling you
exactly
how to do things, I guess.
And like, we are accountable to our funders. Obviously, we tell them, like, this is what we're planning to do with your money, and you have to tell them if you haven't done that, and they get to choose whether they take it back or not. But freedom is everything, and I think that translates into my personal life as well. So I think there was a period in my life where financially I super overextended myself. It meant I couldn't travel very much, and it was all in the name of having the big house and all of that. And actually that's all gone now. The house is gone, the pressure is gone, and I feel free again. I feel excited, and there's opportunity, and it was such a daft thing to do now I look back at it, and I knew better, but I also perhaps didn't realise how important freedom was.
Well, it's a great lesson for those listening. So, that's at least hopefully it will benefit someone else not to maybe make that kind of mistake, which is one of the hopes I have for this podcast. And you talked a bit about, you love your outdoors activities and so on, and we've talked about the South Coast. You couldn't hardly be a better place for doing that stuff. I just always find it interesting in terms of your happiness and well-being. Like, do you see a big connection between those two things?
Absolutely. So every weekend that I'm not on holiday, or actually what I would call proper adventuring, there's a micro adventure. So I went to see a really great guy talk, and I can't remember what his name was, but it was about micro adventures and how you should have a micro adventure in every day that you have, and do something that is even in your locality but different or challenging or exciting. Like, where we live is perfect for that. Like, every Sunday is adventure day. We take the dog for a massive walk, go and see something we haven't seen before, go back to a place we've been, but just taking that time to like look around, enjoy the weather. Like, you can wear whatever, as long as you've got the right clothes on. The weather is weather, but appreciating different environments in those contexts. And yeah, I mean, we are incredibly lucky, but my happiness is absolutely directly linked to how much time I spend outside, also how much time I spend with friends, and my physical health as well. Like, so I've just come out, for those of you that didn't see me before, but I've just come out of having a cast on my leg for the last 6 weeks, and it's been driving me mad because I haven't been able to do all of those things.
You lost that freedom.
Exactly. And I started to just realise that being able to move my body, being able to go to the gym, being able to spend time outdoors, it's a gift. And if you look at exercise and you look at it that way, it stops feeling like such a chore, and it's something that you can do for yourself really easily.
I do think, though, that's a real difference in perspective, because I can imagine you, like me, you never see doing that stuff as a chore. It's a joy, and it's actually key to enabling you to do everything else in your life.
Yeah, definitely.
Success, you kind of touched on it, but I really want to dispel that kind of myth of like the big house or the fast car being success, because clearly that isn't it, even though often it's glamorized and made to look like that on social media. We talked about what success was when you started your teaching career, but through your journey, how's that changed, and what does success mean to you now?
So good. Success to me now means balance, which I would never have said that, never have said that years ago. But it means about getting all of the elements right. So down to, am I sleeping enough? Am I eating the right foods? Am I spending time with the people that I love? Am I learning? That for me is a huge, huge piece of what success looks like is my mind still open? Am I still interested? Am I curious? Am I listening to other people? Because there is no way that my time would be where it is now had I not have met such incredible people on the way. And I had no idea how kind and helpful human beings can be. In the world of teaching, this doesn't really happen very much. We're too busy to even breathe. But I didn't know how to run a charity. I'm a teacher. It's still, that's my identity. If you ask me now, CEO or teacher, I'm definitely still a teacher. But I have been given so much good advice. I have listened hard to a lot of what people have taught to me. I've read every book there is going. I've calmed down a little bit now. I don't feel quite so frantic with it. But balance and the success of the charity is hinged to this, because I know when I am working too hard and pushing too fast, too hard, I am just knackering the people underneath me in the chain, and I can recognise it now because I can see it in them, and I'm like, Krista, you need to back off, because actually just because I'm working at 900 miles an hour doesn't mean that everybody else should or could work like that. And so it's about constantly coming back to that place of balance. And like you said earlier, there is a massive goal here. Like, we are trying to change the system. Like, we are literally fundamentally going after the system, but it's bit by bit by bit by bit, and celebrate each of the wins on the way, because they're all building towards that bigger picture. And I have no idea, truthfully, whether we will change the system by the time it's time for me to shuffle off this mortal coil. But like, what I will know is the work that we've done has paved the way to make that change.
And you want that success to be sustainable. Like, there's no point burning out the whole team now. You want it to continue to progress. And I wonder what you think the most important skills. You talked, I kind of really resonate with me, this idea of continual development and learning and curiosity. But what do you think the skills are that you have that enable you to be successful?
Oh, it's a difficult question. I think I love people, and I think everyone has a story. Everyone has something they can share. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they come from. And I love talking to people. I love listening. I love learning from them. I think probably the fact that I am incredibly reflective, sometimes too far. And I definitely went down a bit of a hole with that a couple of years ago, where it's like constant self-improvement, reading every book there was going, I'm going to have therapy, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and trying to do it all at the same time is not healthy. But having a managed approach that now, I've had quite a bit of therapy in the last couple of years, and it's amazing, the change that it's made in me in terms of understanding bits of what's been in the past, understanding what I can leave there, but also then allowing time for it to assimilate and to become the new version of you. And I'm very grateful that I've had that privilege to have that opportunity to reflect in that way. And I think probably the last thing, I've got to say this because my brother and I talked about this before I came on, is a absolute disregard for the rules in terms of I don't do fear very well. So I don't know, every good thing that has ever happened to me has been because an opportunity's been put in front of me and I've gone, oh, go on then. And I have done some wild things as a result of that. So I ended up in an airplane with some very, very famous people after we'd done a tour around the top of the Matterhorn in a helicopter, because I said yes to an email about something that sounded like it might be fun and had an outdoors element to it. And I think, yeah, I'm not fearless, definitely not fearless, because I do feel it, but it's overcoming the fear with a slight sense of excitement, and that anything is possible.
I absolutely love that. And you've set up the final part of this perfectly, and I never asked you to do that, but I always finish with a feature I call Life by Misadventure, because I always find it fascinating. I know in my own life I've learnt stuff doing things like playing in bands and through being in teams, whether it's sports or activities or whatever. you always learn amazing lessons putting yourself out there. And so my question for you is, what lessons have you learned from an unexpected source?
So this question has caused quite the pondering in the Cartlidge family. And it's interesting actually hearing kind of from my mum and my brother what their take on this has been, and what's been the most kind of powerful thing that they think has allowed me to grow. But we came to the conclusion it's not one thing. I'm very lucky in that I have had a lot of opportunity. Again, partly because I'll take it if it's put in front of me. But I think the biggest lesson for me in all of it is that you've got to let it go. So when I say that, who I was when I was 20 is not who I was when I was 30, and is not who I was now that I'm 40. And I think I used to feel a lot of guilt about things I did when I was 20, things I did when I was 30. You look back and you think, oh, I wish I'd been better. I wish I'd done that. I wish I hadn't done that, and those kind of things. And actually somebody said to me a while ago, and they said, but when you were 20, you didn't have the experience that you have now. When you were 25, you didn't have the experience that you have now. If you were the same now as you were back then we would have a question to ask. But actually, it was Barack Obama said it, you make the best decision with the information that you have at the time. But learning to forgive yourself for the things that you didn't do right when you were younger, and just keep working on being a better version of you, whatever that looks like, whatever that means to you, is absolutely key. And I hope I keep learning.
Well, that is just a brilliant answer. I absolutely love that. And it's an amazing way to wrap up, because sadly that brings us to the end. So I need to finish by saying, for those that have listened and are interested in helping, and that might be volunteering, it might hopefully be sponsorship or something, what are the best links for people to keep up to date with MYTIME?
Thank you. So we're on every social media channel now. We even have a TikTok, which we didn't do before. But actually, the best place to find us is our website. So it's www.mytimeyoungcarers.org. And if you're looking for us on socials, just look for MYTIME Young Carers.
Perfect. Well, I'll put all the links in to make it easy for people. But thank you for being such a great guest, and for just the amazing work you do, and keep on breaking rules. And
that's never going to be a problem.
I'm always drawn to a rebel myself. Yeah. So it's really exciting to see how Unseen Sacrifices continues to make its mark, and good luck with everything else.
Thank you very much.